So I'd like to motivate this with why defensibility matters. And an example I really like is that of Blue Apron. Has anyone here not heard of Blue Apron? Okay. Blue Apron is this like food delivered to your house startup, big company now where you can cook it. It's a neat service. There's tons of services like it. The Blue Apron is fundamentally a software-enabled business. It's not entirely a software business. It's not software-enabled. They're the first of its kind to the market, and they have a good team even to this day. And yet they really struggle to hold their position in the market. Their value has dropped by 15 times since IPO. And so it's important, it's a good motivating example. You can be the first product, you can even be the best product. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay a successful business for a long time. So I like to talk about defensibility as a spectrum. It's all the way from something commodity like water to things you can defend maybe with a brand, the things which consumers might hate, but they really don't have a choice about getting around. So today's talk is going to be about strengthening your market position once you already have a product that hopefully people like. So I'm going to do this in 4 parts. How to go about making a business defensible, with some unique properties about software, a history of story time of software monopolies, and a little bit about how to predict the future, or make the future. So how do you make a business defensible? And this is really simple. Like there's like business school talks that basically classes that go on about this for years, and they're sort of all outcroppings of like the fundamental needs of human beings, which I break down into 2 here. People need resources. We need food, water, shelter, other stuff to survive, and we're very much an interdependent species. Like we wouldn't really be able to like win in a fight with a bear or a lion, but the way we are where we are is because we've learned how to work with other people and connect. So this translates into 2 ways you can make a defensible business for people. You either own finite resources that people need, or you operate a network of people that's hard for people to leave. Let me give you an example of this. Oh, and I want to emphasize before that, like, it's actually really important that the resources be finite. Otherwise, anyone else can come along and offer people the same thing. And it's really important that the network's actually hard to leave. So if you're WeWork, you can claim you have a network, but it's not actually that hard to go get office space somewhere else. Okay. Finite resources, it's typically land. Historically, that's been the biggest finite resource that creates monopolies, but also IP and talent these days. And there's various kinds of networks that people operate that lead to defensibility. One of my favorite examples of something that brought this together is AT&T, which had operated as a government-backed monopoly for almost 100 years. In fact, the government broke them down twice and manages to keep coming together as how strong the monopolistic properties of something like AT&T is. And they own really expensive physical infrastructure. They own all the wires that puts the network together. And it's also very hard for people to not be in the telephone network. This effect was extremely strong for the longest time. Okay. There's ethical questions about monopolies. You can argue that a lot of things that you do to establish something defensible are sort of zero-sum behaviors. You can also argue, as the patent office and the existence of patents successfully has, is that if there's too much competition, then you can't have long-term innovation. I'm not here to take a position on any of this. My goal is to sort of explain the mechanics of this behavior, and you can take that and try and establish a monopoly and try and break one down. My goal is to educate. Okay, so unique properties of software. I think there's 3 really interesting things about software. One is that software personalizes. Software can be different things to different people, which is very unique in the history of products. No 2 of you probably have the same feed when you go to Netflix today. Software has really low cost to copy. So historically, with products like building and selling a TV, the most expensive part of building and selling TVs was making the TV itself and making every new TV that you're going to sell. That's not true with software. Once you've built it, it's extremely cheap to copy. These floppies used to cost some amount of small money, and now it's basically free to just distribute software. Okay, and the third interesting property that software has is faster network effects. So we'll get into what this means in a second. It has a really interesting interaction with the free property, the free distribution property. So when you have a network system like a telephone network, right, the more people that get on the network, the more valuable it becomes for any single person to be on the network. So these are network systems, and they have this interesting property where, like, as the number of people using a telephone increases, it becomes more valuable for the next person to have. And these systems have a property called the tipping point, at which point the value really starts to increase really fast. Now, typically, that is offset by the fact that it costs a certain amount of money to enter the network. So it takes some money to have a cell phone subscription and a physical phone. And software changes that because software sort of is largely available for free, at least to try, and that means that the cost is really low to enter, which makes these network effects, if your software is actually good, tend to build up way faster. Okay, so recap, unique properties of software, zero marginal costs, personalizes, and it has faster network effects. So now let's put that together. We've talked about how to make anything defensible, and we've talked about using good software. So how do you make software defensible? I'm going to do this through a bunch of stories, but I really like starting with this quote. And I'll introduce this concept of bundling and unbundling. You'll see how a lot of patterns basically are one of these two things. So that's the idea of bundling. It's the idea that you take something that already works and you add some sort of value to the product. So once Facebook fundamentally started to work, they went ahead and added all of these additional features that makes it more valuable for people to stick with. You can also do this thing with bundling where you start to give people things that they don't really want, but because you're the sort of dominant monopoly in the space, they kind of have no choice but to buy it from you. So there's like a case of bundling not bad, a point at which consumers start to become unhappy. Yeah. And unbundling is the idea that you take something from a suite of features and you sell just that. A really good example of this is like when the internet came along, a lot of marketplace activity happened through Craigslist. And as time went on, like Craigslist unbundled into these several billion-dollar companies because each of them took a very specific part of what was being bought and sold on Craigslist and did that. Just unbundling. So, again, another very quick recap of what we've talked about so far. There's two ways to establish defensibility. You own a finite resource or a hard-to-leave network. And software has some unique properties that we talked about. And a lot of market opportunities are in bundling and unbundling features. So with those lenses, let's do a case study of a few stories over time. So and this is going to be companies we're all largely heard of. It's IBM, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. And let's start with IBM. So we're in like the 60s and before. Computers are actually really hard to make. Computer hardware is hard, computer software is hard. And the best way to make it all work together was to simply own all of the relevant resources. You have the best talent, you make all the hardware, you make all the software, and you make it all work together. And that's kind of how IBM at one point was basically synonymous with computers. That's one thing. There was a consumer counterpart to this idea of full vertical integration as well. That's Apple. And Apple basically took this idea and applied it to consumer. And that resulted in products like the 1984 Mac. So this era goes on for a while, and then how does it end? It ends through a bunch of things happening over a period that spans 15 years or so. So people learned how to make microprocessors independently and sell them for computers. And that's the establishment of Intel and other peer companies in the 60s. In the 70s, Microsoft's first big piece of software was a programming language. They actually took something that was a standard programming language called BASIC and made their own very successful version of it. So software and hardware starts to get unbundled, and that sort of results in 1981 when IBM introduces what's called the Ibm Pc. It's actually the first piece of hardware where they allow for both third-party hardware extensions and third-party software extensions. And IBM's sort of shooting itself in the foot at this point because they have this whole complete monopoly and they're saying, all right, we're just opening up a platform, and they're hoping they're losing their defensibility because they're getting rid of their bundling ability in both hardware and software. So Microsoft is the company that realizes this, and their realization is that hardware is no longer the hard thing to do. IBM will do that, third-party manufacturers will do that, and they really focus on building good software assets. And that plays out over a few decades, and Microsoft becomes a tremendously valuable company. And what's beginning to happen in the 80s and 90s is that people are now using computers to collaborate and talk to each other. And Microsoft wants to be at the center of all of that, so they introduce proprietary formats. So if I write a Word document and I want to share it with any of you, the only way I can do it is this document format, and the way you open this document is if you have Microsoft software. So it's a network effect that Microsoft's establishing with a proprietary format. But something else is happening in the late 80s, early 90s, which is the World Wide Web is coming along. It's like an open standard. Anybody can publish to the web. Anybody can read off the web. So the people at Microsoft are actually very smart about trying to maintain their position in the market. They do a strategy they call embrace, extend, extinguish. I love this name. It's just like scary. The way you see this strategy play out most predominantly is in Internet Explorer. So the web's coming along. Microsoft says, "Hey, we'll just give away a web browser for free." Before this, like the most prominent web browser was Netscape Navigator. It used to cost about $50 or so. Microsoft gives it away for free. They embrace the web, and then Microsoft has proprietary extensions like directives, basically things that you can get only with the Microsoft browser that will make your experience better. So they extend it, and then the idea is that you now need to buy Microsoft software on the server end as well to be compatible with Microsoft software on the client side, and that extinguishes competition once they have a sufficiently strong market position. Solid strategy goes on for a while. This government thing gets in the way. So Microsoft has a famous antitrust suit happen in the 90s. They are forced to offer consumers a choice of internet browsers and be more respectful of open standards. And that sort of breaks down Microsoft's monopoly on software through the operating system. So now the second phase happens where the web is unbundling application software from the operating system. Previously, if you own the operating system, you own the entire stack, and now application software is unbundling. There's a wave of companies that come along and take advantage of that. One of the biggest ones is Google, who realizes that people use computers a lot to find things that they want, and we can just focus on that. Today, Google is the biggest search engine in the world, not because they have better algorithms than anyone else. Anyone else can hire the same people who came up with those things and build an equally good product. The reason Google's the dominant search engine in the world is actually because they have all this proprietary data on what people click on when they search for something. And that data is what enables them to be better at a wide variety of search results. I'm going to talk about this a little more, but let's jump ahead to another company that's done a really good job of establishing its market position. Facebook's basically played every trick of the book. They have extremely strong network effects. The product personalizes super well, and they bundle in basically every feature you can think of when it comes to doing anything with people in your social network. So with Google and Facebook, we're beginning to see a defensibility strategy that we have never really seen before. They lock data and they lock your identity. We've sort of seen things like this before. We introduced number portability laws to get around things like the AT&T monopoly. This is a slightly different beast, and we're still working with like how much power to give to these companies versus how much should be decentralized. And there are market forces that oppose their position. So there's privacy, and there's other forces. Really, it's like privacy is a factor. People do care about privacy in their search engine. Bigger players like Apple are effectively making software do more on the client than on centralized servers. And then there's also just government efforts of different sorts. So what you see through the spectrum of this playing out over the last 40 years or so is this pattern of these defensibility being a resource ownership strategy, gradually moving to a network control strategy. But there's a really interesting pattern that I like to see in the rise and fall of these. And by fall, I don't really mean that these companies end, that they sort of stabilize into a position and then maybe give way to another wave. So a centralized service comes along, it creates a lot of value by taking something that people don't have collective action over and doing it. They increase the percent of the wealth that they create that they're able to capture successfully. And then the wealth capture method starts to hinder the company's own ability to create more wealth. So as a platform, they have to open up, or if they don't, regulatory pressure kicks in, or competitors come in and take advantage of the fact that there's more wealth to be created in adjacent spaces. And through either the incumbent realizing it for themselves or by simply missing the boat, they tend to unbundle. Their features tend to unbundle, and it creates new opportunities. Okay, so quick takeaways of everything so far. We've talked about two assets, two ways to do defensibility, some unique properties of software, and like how opportunities arise in bundling and unbundling. And I want to talk about the future a little bit now that we have all these tools to play with. So one thing about the future is that I don't like predicting the future. This is what we thought the future would be like 40, 50 years ago. It looks nothing like this, and I'm kind of happy we have some more trees than in here. And these systems are really difficult to predict in detail. There's just too much combinatorial explosion. So don't even try. But what you can do is be extremely generative of the space of ideas that is possible with things that are true. Venture capitalists are basically, this is their job to predict the future, and they're terrible at it. Most of the bets they make are negative returns. But the way they structure their bets is to just bet on a lot of things so that the times that they are right, the returns really high. So one interesting model for the future is to just look at what's fundamentally true. Like the cost of energy is declining, or like climate is going a certain way. There's just certain things that are true, and which I'll get into that in a second. And then you can basically play with these trends in your own mind to see how they might combine in interesting ways to create opportunities in the future. So there's some interesting trends that I want to put out that I think are happening in software. One is this cost of building software is getting really cheap. It's like there's a lot more skilled people, software, there's a lot of open source, it's become very cheap to build software. A bunch of these companies that have really strong network effects are actually seeing some downsides to their network effects. So one example is that Facebook's actually seeing a decline in people actually posting original content to Facebook. They call this the OBPS decline. And this is basically like people don't want to share with an ever-growing network. The desire for privacy is increasing. And then there's like products where people are, like, there's the whole spectrum of claims about algorithmic recommendations and how they are increasingly, they're going from recommending things that you truly find interesting to things that you are just more like the average interesting things. This is a topic that I'm happy to go into, but it's a topic for another talk. Cool. So I kind of want to just open up at this time for you to think about or talk about, like, what are things that are true and are going to happen in the future? And then we can see if there's interesting ways in which to combine them. Would anyone like to volunteer a thing, a simple thing that's happening?
Quick question. One term you used twice. I enjoyed it. That was very nice, though. It's stuff like my son growing up. This is very nostalgic. So good job. Actually, I think I have 100 AOL discs somewhere. The term you had, the term zero sum something. You had a zero sum term, right? Like
Yeah. This is the zero sum is basically it's an idea in mathematics. The idea is basically there's like a finite number of winnings to be had, and we're all competing over trying to like have a slice of that pie. Right? the idea is that if you establish, I think the best example of zero-sum monopoly is like oil. There's only so much oil in the world. And if you own the land that has the most oil, you will just have the best position in oil forever. However, energy is not nearly as much of a zero-sum market. There's like the sun, and we've harvested a very small percent of energy from the sun. And so that's like more non-zero sum. It's like there's far more energy to be had globally than we're able to exploit out of land. So if we were to only focus on oil, it's a monopolizable zero-sum resource. But energy is not.
You just kind of putting it out there, kind of be aware of what make that part of the decision that we brought that up.
I think it's like there's like an ethical debate about like is trying to establish a defensible position or a monopoly, like defensible all the way bordering on monopoly. Is that an ethical thing to do? So on one hand, you can say like, hey, if I just control all the oil in the world, I can do whatever I want, and that's like potentially bad if I get too greedy. On the other hand, there's like arguments to be made that like I worked really hard on a particular idea for like, a process, and then the moment I've actually created like a drug, for example, anybody can come along and just copy it while I have while I did all the hard work. And that's why patents exist, for example. And so there's arguments on both sides, depending on what the actual product is, for how defensible of a position is ethical. And it's up to you. So that's one thing of it. Cool. I want to get back to this for a second. Oh, we lost it. It's like I'm interested in like ideas of like what's going to happen in the future. Yeah.
Customers are interested in food that is more organic. So large companies like say Kraft Heinz that has a strong market leader in ketchup is being threatened by other companies that are offering foods that are like organic or have sustainable supply chains that are ethical.
Any others? Thank you.
Well, like the whole artificial intelligence, machine learning, I think not just the automation, because that's been going on, but the ethics, the jobs, like what's going to happen with these robots and what's positive that's going to be done, and then, the other side. And it's not just those technologies, but that's probably one of the biggest impacts, like sensors and
Based on your truthism around the increase for the desire for more privacy, that means there's going to be a decrease in the sense of personalization around software. We'll be less willing to personalize our software in order to save the privacy.
Right. Yeah, and there's like, I think that's a trade-off that people are very willing to take. There's also the growth of something called differential privacy, which is the idea that you do collaborative filtering over software, you do personalization, but without a central actor ever really realizing what it is your activity was. So, like, Netflix can recommend movies to me that are similar to movies that I've watched based on what other people have watched, but it's possible to do that in ways that Netflix never really finds out what it is I'm watching.
Sure, I mean, the aggregated sum of the herd can certainly provide that, but still you can't attribute that to the individual.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and that's a trade-off that more people are not willing to take. And another outcrop of this is like personalization in itself is not necessarily, it's good and useful up until a point, and that you get to a point with algorithmic recommendations where you're just like you start to question originality. I don't know if this has happened to any of you. So YouTube's just sending you down the same rabbit hole of like my 6 interests and when do I get to be original? What is me really? It's an interesting time. Not get into the self. I mean, I'm happy to later, but not this one. Yeah.
Wow.
Cool.
Well, not to sound morbid, but people are definitely going to get sick again in the future. And sick, like flu, cold, etc. And I think something that could definitely be enticing in an emerging market is more health and fitness, right? I mean, we see the rise of that with ClassPass, Fitbit, even our Apple Watches. But I think there was a product specifically focused on individuals' health and goals and driving them towards the right goal or set point that they want in their life, I think that could actually be, I think that could actually acquire a large number of users.
And I think there's really interesting compounding trends that we're understanding behavioral psychology better than we ever have before. We're understanding how people are motivated, what will actually keep them with these programs, how they will achieve their goals more successfully. It's really interesting patterns there.
So maybe software companies, this is a trend more for companies, but tackling more niche industries, because a lot of the low-hanging fruit's gone in terms of e-commerce, social networks, etc.
Yeah, I'm super interested in this. It's like people basically, so much of what we live in right now is like based around this assumption that there's going to be a monolith company that's going to own a large percent of software. Like Facebook is valued at what it's valued at because like it captures a large percent of people's social needs. That's not necessarily a thing that's going to be true forever. Like you can see like networks break down, as we saw with the Craigslist example. Like lots of niche companies, we're going to see like more levels of niche companies, and I think it'll be really interesting to see one, like what level of aggregation is needed in that future, and then just do some of our assumptions about basic things like venture capital breakdown. Just, are those big hits just not available anymore?
So the idea of looking at the future through some of these patterns that happened in the past, are there outliers that break this model down that you're thinking about for the future? One such
Curious if
example.
you think there are.
So,
like,
one such
this is a
example.
simplification, but like any map of the territory, there's like always exceptions.
So if the global warming is true, which it pretty much looks like it is, there's going to be massive reshuffling of population. That's a game changer for a lot of products. Probably going to not be necessary when you're talking about work.
A lot of products that will become necessary.
That's right.
Like we haven't done on that scale, like human migration, and some of these will be nonprofit organizations, government backed systems. Some of these are going to be like people trying to make profit as well. So, yeah, I don't know like if the model really breaks down with the global warming, but it is an interesting event on a scale we've never before seen.
One truth about the future is that as internet speeds get faster and faster, the dependency for apps will decrease. So rather than having like an app to install, you can actually just use it streamed from like some service. So that will influence the way how people build products.
Yeah, it reminds me of two things that are going on. Like one, if you've all just gone to Instagram.com on your phones these days, it does everything the app does.
Yeah.
It's remarkably good. You don't really even have to install Instagram to get a lot of the benefits of it. Progressive web apps is the name for the trend. Some things like Google Stadia, which is the video game platform that you never really buy and install a game on your client. It's just streamed live. It's another really interesting example of what happens in markets this opens up.
Isn't there like one of the bigger things that's trending is regionally where, let's say in China, where WeChat takes over the monolith for all your application integrations. And here we're more decentralized with many more apps. The trend of which direction that's going to go globally. Is it going to be towards a WeChat model, which doesn't seem to happen in the United States, trending away from Facebook having all our social interaction.
Yeah, that's a really interesting property where like with network effects in particular, software network effects, like different markets tend to find different equilibrium points. Like China's found this like I have played around a little bit with WeChat. I don't know too much details. If anyone does, please jump in. But like WeChat's found this integration point where WeChat is the operating system. Like, that's where you start. That's what you have open. Like, and they bundled everything, like every service you could need. And I think there's like good. There's strong market forces that keep it that way. Like they own a payments integration. Like payments is decentralized in the US. Payments in the US has this other problem where like Visa and MasterCard have their own strong duopoly there, and they charge like a 2.75% fee, which makes micropayments impossible in a lot of things. And so, and here we found this thing where like people are like, Facebook is for my social and news needs, and Twitter is for my news needs. It's So it's an interesting property. Like there's no one global optima that markets find. They tend to find different spots. China's a really interesting example in contrast to the US.
Potential cryptocurrency to kind of shift that around a bit, if it becomes a more accepted transactional model in the United States, would be possible.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see if we just have whatever, if something gives us that liquidity of 0%, effectively 0% transaction fees, like so many things become possible that aren't. Like China's a very healthy ecosystem of paying for content, paying for things like podcasts and so on that we don't really have as much of here. And that's enabled because the small payments are very easy.
You would never charge another 15 cents for something, but you could essentially charge.
I have a question. I'm curious, what's your thoughts around niche market, but networking, I guess networking effects for the niche market, and how much scale can that achieve?
Niche market. This is general, so I can go on this forever and I don't want to rant too much. So how strong of a network effect can you establish in the niche market? You can establish it depends. So the answer is it depends on the niche market and depends specifically on how hard it is how hard you can make it to leave your network. So a couple of companies come to mind. So there's a lot of companies that have tried to do two-sided marketplaces around a service like cleaners or a tutor or a dog walker, and they tend to have this property where like consumers basically find someone and then they undercut you can just take the middleman out of the equation. Right? So it's a niche market, but it's not hard to leave the network. The hard to leave property is really important because they can make a connection that breaks down. There's ways I've seen where like companies keep these network effects for longer, where for things like getting a contractor to remodel your house, for example, that's something you only need once every 5 or 10 years, possibly even less, and it's a high margin business. If you create liquidity around a niche market like that, you're not as worried about like someone establishing a long-term marketplace, and so you can have a high margin on something like that. So it depends. Most fun things.
Did you find anything at Quora and or other work that you've done to help keep people? Because one of the things you talked about are these network effects. So, any specifics or kind of some of the details?
I mean, there's sort of natural forces. There's shady things you can do, but you shouldn't do, and then there's the pattern I've seen is like if your network is actually creating a value by connecting things that would have been otherwise very hard to connect. So Quora, for example, is a network that basically connects like people who have questions to people who have the answers to questions, and they can come from like anywhere in the world. So those kinds of networks tend to add the most value, and you can keep them. Which you see in other networks like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, for example. They're like small, dense, well-connected networks. And so they're actually not as defensible in a lot of ways as you might think they are, because the parties involved can very easily agree to just move. They're multi-homing is like a term for the idea that like Lyft drivers, for example, multi-home with Uber. They can just run on either service. And when it's easy for you to switch one service to another, it's not that strong of a network effect. But if you are actually creating some sort of like global demand supply matching that is, and you're actually adding value to the equation. So Quora, for example, does that by all of the investments in machine learning to match questions to answers that wouldn't have otherwise match. Their fundamental defensibility is like the matching that's happening there. And it's similar to how Google does like ranking. And yeah, there's a bunch of, but you have to provide value, because if you're not providing value to, based on the asset you're collecting, then people can switch.
Yeah. It's just interesting because I was at Reddit and the volume that they have is really surprising.
The volume.
Yeah, like the volume of users is just huge. So
Yeah.
the value that they're
Yeah, Reddit is an extremely strong network effect. It's people try to create like alternative Reddits, and it basically never works because for all the problems that Reddit has, like that's where all the content is generated, and so it's very easy to come back to. Right?
Almost like Craigslist.
How did Quora old scores monetization ads, or did you sign up for
Or monetization stats.
Quora Pro for $9.99 a month?
No, not yet. And I don't know what they're up to. They're always tinkering with it, trying new models out. There have been models like just pay for an answer or other experiments.
It also seems like, so you said earlier that for services that people use frequently, it's much easier for people to leave the platform. So I'm curious, what's your thoughts around what made like two-sided marketplace like Airbnb really hard to leave?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's like services that you use frequently inherently make them easy to leave.
Yeah.
Services that where the middleman isn't actually providing that much value. So like switching from WhatsApp to iMessage to Messenger to Instagram is very easy. Airbnb does provide this very strong value of like basically credentialing places as trustworthy and reliable and so on. They are pretty hard to leave. The only viable competitor is basically you either have the supply or you have the demand in the market somewhere, right? So the only viable emerging competitor to Airbnb is like Booking.com and their homestay program, which I don't remember his numbers exactly, but they're close from what I know roughly. And they basically said like we already have one-sided liquidity for people looking for hotels. Maybe they're interested in homestays.
So do you have, I guess, some examples of what are the really high value added for network effect or products that offer network effect?
Basically, like this is a great question. I don't have too many of the like basically patterns, right, of value adds from the middle.
Maybe like Slack or something.
Slack I actually find really interesting. I think their defensibility isn't really the network effect. It's like as an application platform. So Slack wants to build a network effect, which I find really interesting. So they basically sell Slack to organizations, and I think number one reason Slack is successful, I think it's just the best in class product initially. So, but your CIO can make the choice to just switch your whole company. And there's strong pressure to do that. So Slack costs $7 a month per user, and the entire G Suite costs $5. And I think Office 365. So what we're seeing in the market is like Microsoft Teams is actually catching up to Slack, but Slack is still like the best product. And they're trying to establish a network effect, which is like they're now trying to enable cross-company Slack. Which is like rooms where you can invite collaborators at like partner companies or whoever you're working with, which I think then starts to establish a stronger network effect.